Okay, fellows, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. Welcome to the Society of Antiquaries for our first public lecture of the 2015 season. It's so nice to see so many people in here. And welcome to the Society. Those of you who don't know much about the Society, we are the oldest society concerned with the material remains of the past. And we compose of an elected fellowship of 3,000 very, very eminent fellows, academics, professionals, even archaeologists like myself, who study the past. And today we're very lucky to have one of the most eminent of our eminent fellows, Professor Norman Hammond, to talk to us about his work in Central and South America. Norman has had a glittering career in archaeologist. He's an archaeologist, an academic, scholar in Mesoamerica, noted for his publications and research on Pre-Columbian Mayan civilization. Norman is a regular in Burlington House, comes in most Thursdays when he's in the country. I'm really looking forward to hearing him lecture today. He's held positions at Cambridge, Bradford, and has been a visiting professor at the University of California at Berkeley, and the Sorbonne and the University of Bonn, and is associate in Maya archaeology at the Peabody Museum, Harvard, and the authorities still haven't caught up with him. Norman is also the archaeology correspondent for the Times newspaper. He was elected a fellow in 1974. And in 1998 was elected a Fellow of the British Academy. So, Norman, it's a great honour to have you lecture for us today, and I'll now go to you to talk about Mayan art and Maya kingship.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get a picture up on the screen. Now, this watercolour by James Stefanoff came into the possession of the British Museum a few years ago. And what it shows us, although it's called an assemblage sculpture, is in fact a sort of Premiership League table of ancient civilizations. So up at the top here, you've got the Elgin marbles. Just below that, you've got the archaic Greek marbles from the Temple of Afer at Egina. Below that, you have got the Greek red and black figure vases and Etruscan tomb paintings and Etruscan tomb sculptures. Below that, we have the antiquities of Egypt, many of these from the British Museum's own collections. And then towards the bottom, we've got reliefs from Persepolis. And then right at the bottom, but importantly still actually in the picture, we've got the sculptures of India and Southeast Asia. And flanking them on either side, we have here a series of sculptures from Copan and Palenque in the Maya area. So the Maya are actually, by 1845, in the Premiership. They're at the bottom, but they're there. And in the century and a half since then, the Maya have never been out of contention as one of the world's great civilizations. Those Maya illustrations that Stefanoff used came from a book called Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas and Yucatan. The illustrations were by the English architect Frederick Catherwood. The book itself written by the American traveller John Lloyd Stephens. That book was published here in London in 1841 by John Murray, not a couple of hundred yards from this room, at number 50 Albemarle Street, and it went through 12 editions in 3 months. It was one of the first travel bestsellers. And as a result, the Maya were put very firmly on the international cultural map, and they have never moved from it. So now we have more than a dozen Maya sites which are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, marked in yellow on the map there. And as an example, Tikal, which I'll come back to a bit later on, what you're seeing is a funeral temple dating to about AD 740 of the ruler Hassel-Chan Kawin. Now, the Maya constructed one of the great civilizations of the ancient world here in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico and in the adjacent countries of Guatemala and Belize and the very western fringes of Honduras and El Salvador. Their chronology, the sites that most of us know from the travel brochures, the National Geographic specials, and the television programs, all date to the classic period here, in pink for those of you at the back, between about AD 250 and 900. Following which we have a post-classic period going down to the Spanish conquest, and a pre-classic period that goes back to the beginnings of settlement in the Maya area, which now, as a result of recent research, goes off this chart to about 1200 BC. Here are two of the most famous Maya images. The one on the left is by Frederick Catherwood, Stela H at Copan, and on the right, one of the treasures of the British Museum's Mexican Gallery, Lintel 24 from Yaxchilan. The first explorers thought that these elaborately dressed individuals might be priests, or in the case of the one on the left, a woman. But we now know that these are in fact Maya kings, and here a Maya queen, engaged in court rituals and dressed appropriately for the occasion. And what I want to talk about today is how we know what we know about Maya rulers and the way in which they presented themselves to their subjects. Here from Tikal, Stela 16, the figure on it is the same chap who is buried underneath that temple pyramid I showed you. You can see the elaborate costume in which a Maya ruler would appear in front of his subjects. You remember how the queen is robed at her coronation in all sorts of symbolic garments. Well, this has nothing on a Maya king, as you can see, and quite how he managed to stagger around under this lot, I don't know. But he's become an icon of the entire Maya cosmological belief system. Those green feathers you see were plucked from the resplendent quetzal, which is a bird that lives up in the mountains. I've put this in for the benefit of an ornithologist in the audience who I know will appreciate it. And the Maya used to harvest these by plucking the four tail feathers out of the male quetzal and then letting it fly away, feeling somewhat embarrassed, to grow a new set. But if I go back just a second, you can see how many hundreds of feathers go to make just a single set of accoutrements. Now, one of the earliest bits of evidence we had for how Maya courtly life worked was when the Bonampak Murals were discovered in 1946 by the oilman Giles Healy, who you can see here at bottom right. And you can see the murals as they were when he discovered them. He was shown them by the local Lacandone Maya Indians who are sitting proudly in front of them. And this is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the Maya area. In the first of three rooms, we see here at a lower level a band of musicians playing rattles and drums and turtle shells and great wooden trumpets over here. And they're processing into a room. On a platform above them are a series of white-robed lords wearing spondylus, thorny oyster shells from the Pacific Ocean as part of their outfits, rarities from afar. And they're all gathered together for the designation of this child here as the heir to the throne of Bonampak in AD 792. At one end of the room, we see the ladies of the court sitting up on a throne, doing their makeup. It appears to be doing their makeup. In fact, this lady is pulling a stingray spine through her tongue to let blood down onto bark paper in this bucket-shaped vessel. as part of the ritual. Letting blood was, as I'll show you, an equal opportunity rite. And then underneath here there's a box that contains a large quantity of cacao or chocolate beans, which was used as a common currency in ancient Mesoamerica. So we're seeing here a scene of royal ritual with a great deal of money and a great deal of bling. The three rooms at Bonampak. The first room here is the heir designation ceremony. In the second room, which I'll show you on the next slide, we have a battle and the arraignment of the prisoners after the battle. And this appears to be the taking of prisoners to acquire both human and material capital by the ruler of Bonampak. And then in the third room, which I'm not going to show you, we have a ritual dance on the steps of the Bonampak pyramid to celebrate victory. Here is the heart of the battle, and the figure here with the jaguar skin vest and the jaguar skin mounted spear is a man who we now know was called Chan Muan. He was the ruler of Bonampak in the late 8th century, and he is here taking a prisoner by the Maya convention of seizing him by the hair. And one of his lieutenants is over here as well. They're wearing a great quantity of jade jewellery and quetzal feather headdresses. Probably they didn't actually wear this stuff into battle, but this is an ex post facto reconstruction in which the bling is used to define the relative statuses of the individuals. So the captive here, of course, is busy losing his status, and shortly afterwards will be losing his life as well. On the opposite wall of room 2, we see what happens after the battle. The prisoners here have been stripped of their jade jewellery, stripped of their headdresses, stripped of all but the most exiguous underwear. If you look at the blood dripping from the fingernails here, they've either had their fingertips perforated or their fingernails ripped out. Here's a dead figure sprawled on the steps, and just out of sight below that is a detached head. One of the prisoners has been decapitated as part of the punishment of the prisoners. And here is again Chan Muan in his jaguar skin vest, wearing an enormous jade pectoral with an upside down face in the form of a detached decapitated head. So Bonampak starts to get us into the way that a Maya court worked and the way that these people would have appeared in public. Now, the fact that I can name him as Chan Muan and we know about Bonampak's external relations is due to the decipherment of Maya writing over the past half century. And there are a multitude of people who contributed to this, but I only want to mention three foundational figures. The first of whom is Heinrich Berlin, who was a wholesale grocer in Mexico City who did Maya epigraphy on the side. And he noticed that what he called emblem glyphs, because he wanted to give them a neutral name, occurred concentrated at different sites, so that with this sign here and this one, the glyphs were concentrated at Palenque, with this sign here at Piedras Negras, with this tied bundle sign at Tikal. And we can now read these signs, and this in fact names the protagonist in the inscription as the Chul Ahau, the Holy Lord of a particular city. So what Berlin showed us was that the Maya inscriptions dealt with real people and real places. The second contributor was Tanya Proskoryakov. She worked on the Pennsylvania excavations at Piedras Negras in the 1930s, and she drew this wonderful reconstruction drawing. And she noticed that the stelae, those standing monuments, like the one I showed you at the beginning from Copan, that these were concentrated into groups in front of particular temples. When she analysed the structure of these groups, she noticed that the first monument in each group had a peculiar design. There was a seated figure inside a niche The niche was decorated with symbols of the planets, as though to say the sky is the limit to my kingdom, and the niche was reached by a ladder with footprints going up it. At the foot of the ladder there is here a sprawled prisoner whose heart has been removed and put on his chest. And she noticed that this was the earliest one in each group. When she looked at the inscription on the sides, she saw that there were two hieroglyphs, one of which dated to the time of dedication of the stela, and which she was able to guess was accession to the throne. And then there was an earlier date referred back to, which she surmised was the birth date of the individual concerned. And as a result of analysing all of these stelae at Piedras Negras, she was able to take these niche stelae, marked here with the red squares, and to show that they formed a set of non-overlapping series, a new set beginning as the old one ended. And she very reasonably proposed that these marked the monuments of the reigns of 7 successive kings of Piedras Negras over the period from AD 603 to after 810. In other words, what she did was she put real people in real time into the real places. So we had a historical geography of the Maya area. A third contributor back in the 16th century was Diego de Landa, the Bishop of Yucatan. He wrote an ethnography of the Maya, and one page in it is of particular use. It includes what he thought of as a Maya alphabet. It says, you see here, Sigese su ABC. Here is their ABC. This was written out for him by his informant, Gaspar Antonio Chi, who didn't actually like doing it because he's written here in Maya script, Manikati. I don't want to do this. But Landa thought he was getting an ABC, but he was asking Chi for A, B, C, D in Spanish. What he was getting were a series of syllables, a phonetic script. Now, for a long time after the rediscovery of Landa's manuscript in the mid-19th century, nobody realised this, and there were a lot of unsuccessful efforts to decipher the script. But the man who actually cracked it was a Russian ethnographer called Yuri Knonosov, a member of the St. Petersburg Cat Club, who realised that this was in fact phonetic, and he was able to decipher a substantial number of Maya words. And ever since this phoneticization of Maya script was understood, we have increasingly been able to decipher the script. So when I started my doctoral fieldwork in the late 1960s, we could understand perhaps 10% of a Maya inscription. Now we understand 90% of it, and what we don't understand are unusual or unique glyphs like some personal names. So now we know what the Maya were saying, we know who they were saying it about, we know when they were saying it, and we know where they were saying it. What we've got is history. It's a history of a relatively small number of people, kings, in a small number of cities that have readable inscriptions. But nevertheless, we know more about some of these Maya rulers than we do about King Arthur. And in fact, the man I want to use to illustrate this specific point reigned over the city of Palenque in Mexico in the 7th century AD. And he was buried underneath the Temple of the Inscriptions here, and this was excavated by Alberto Rustigillier in the early 1950s. What he found was a stairway going down through the temple to a subterranean vault, in which was an enormous stone sarcophagus containing a skeleton covered with jade jewellery, and the lid of the sarcophagus, which you'll see again in a moment, has a very elaborate design carved upon it. The sides of the sarcophagus have elaborate designs and inscriptions as well. The skeleton, incidentally, was at the time aged to about 40 years of age by the biological anthropologists, but we've had recent reason to change our views on that. Now, the recording of the Palenque art and inscriptions was carried out by my late colleague Merle Green Robertson, who you see here with one of the Palenque stucco sculptures, And she also took this wonderful photograph of the sarcophagus lid with a camera somehow got up into the ceiling of the burial vault. What you see is the man in the sarcophagus here, and he is dressed in a skimpy jade kilt with an elaborate headdress. He is rising out of these two jaws. He's rising up out of the underworld. He's being resurrected after his death to take his place in the cosmos among the heavenly bodies, which form the border to the sculpture. Now, we know his name. We know his name was Hammond. And on the sides of the sarcophagus, we have 6 generations of his ancestors portrayed. And around the edge of the lid here, we have an inscription which gives details of his life and that of his immediate ancestors. Now this, when it was deciphered, presented a problem. And here you see Pakal featuring in the genealogy of the rulers of Palenque that was proposed in the 1970s by the people who actually discovered the structure of my royal genealogies. The text says that he lived from AD 603 to 683. That's 80. But the anthropologists had said that the skeleton was that of a man of 40. What was going on? Well, there were several schools of thought. One was that the anthropologists were simply wrong. Yes. Another was that it was somebody else in the coffin. And a third was that the Maya had simply faked the evidence for their own political reasons. The people that sorted this out were the late Linda Sheely and the still with us Peter Matthews. And they showed that because the inscriptions dealing with the reign of Pakal fitted in with those of his predecessors and his successors, and the relationships of the Palenque dynasty with other dynasties in other Maya cities, that there was no way in which the dates could be fudged. The entire edifice of Maya history would come tumbling down. So what we now have is a dynasty that's been expanded tremendously. Pakal, for instance, is here, but instead of only 2 or 3 successors, we've now got a whole series of later kings reinforcing the reconstructed history. And we've got new art discovered showing these later kings as well. These 2 sculptures have only been discovered in the last decade, and they represent the successors of Pakal through into the late 8th century. But there's still the question of how old he was. Well, here he is, wearing this wonderful jade death mask, and here is the most wonderful reconstruction of it done by the Mexican National Museum. This is a new refitting of the whole thing. Re-examination of the skeleton has shown that, in fact, he was 80. That more sophisticated methods of biological analysis have shown that this was, in fact, an old man, a plump, well-fed old man, and that may be perhaps why he survived. But we now know that Maya rulers could in fact survive into their 9th decade, and in the case of one ruler, the one who I showed you on the Yaxchilan sculpture at the beginning, he may have survived into his 90s. Now, whether or not these inscriptions were telling the truth is something that was questioned at other sites as well. So here at Copan in Honduras, and here you see the same stela that I showed you in Catherwood's lithograph at the beginning. But here we have a monument dedicated by the king Washakluhubakawil, who reigned from 686 through to 736. He put this monument up to himself not long before he was captured and beheaded by his neighbour, the king of Quirigua, showing you that pride goes before a fall. Now, he appears along with a number of other named rulers of Copan here on a monument that's called Altar Q, dedicated in AD 770. It's sitting here in the courtyard of the Acropolis, And this is another of those wonderful reconstructions by Tanya Proskuriakov. Now, altar Q is in pole position at the foot of the staircase of the main temple in Copan. And what it shows us on its four sides are 16 figures of Maya kings. And they're all identified by their name glyphs. They're sitting on their name glyphs. These form their thrones. Except for this one here, who simply sits on a glyph that says, the Lord, the King. And this is the person who we identify as a man called Yashkukmo, the founder of the dynasty. Somehow, I'm afraid these texts have got transposed, but this is Yashpasa, the 16th and last king in the dynasty who dedicated the altar. Now, this man was supposed to have reigned back in the 5th century. Yashpasa is 300 years later. Nobody really had much problem with the 2 or 3 precursors of Yashpasa having existed. But a number of people very much doubted whether the dynasty of Copan had really gone back 3 centuries in time and had been recorded so that we knew its names and the dates of its rulers in detail. They thought that these people had probably been petty village chiefs and that the history had essentially been made up later, acquired ancestors, if you like, the way that Major General Stanley acquired his in the Pirates of Penzance. Here is one of the people that nobody really doubted existed. This is ruler 12, Kakhuti Witzkawil, but he reigned not long before Yashpasa. He was within, if you like, almost living memory at the time that altar Q was dedicated. But the earlier ones, people doubted, or some people doubted. But recent research has shown that the doubters were wrong. My late colleague Bob Scherer ran a whole series of tunnels through the Copan Acropolis underneath all the temples. These are the upper level, then there's a lower level and another level underneath that. He ran something like 2 miles of tunnels through the Acropolis and recorded a whole series of buildings, one inside the other, like Russian dolls. And the one I want to come to in particular is this set of buildings here beneath this main temple. What we see beneath the main temple, structure 16 we call it, is a perfectly preserved building of around AD 600. It was painted bright red. It was decorated with masks of Yashkukmo, the supposed founder of the dynasty, with his name spelt out in Maya imagery. Yashkukmo means blue-green Quetzal macaw, and in fact he's shown with the attributes of the green-tailed Quetzal bird and also of the scarlet macaw, one of the common parrots in the jungle there. So in about AD 600, nobody then had any doubt that Yashkukmo had existed back in the past, but he'd become a god. Below that, several layers of earlier small buildings were found, which included burials. And this one here was of a woman. It was covered in cinnabar, mercuric sulfide, literally kilograms of it. And in fact, they had to wait 2 years to fumigate the tomb of mercury vapour before they could excavate it. But this lady, who was equipped with a lot of extremely fancy pottery, including this pot, which was imported all the way from Central Highland, Mexico, up near Mexico City, she is thought to have been the wife of the founder, Yashkukmo, dying some years after him. Because below her, in the earliest of these tombs, Bob Scherer found the skeleton of a middle-aged man lying on a slab, and from a sculpture found nearby, which I'll show you on the next slide, we can identify this from a contemporary image and inscription as being Yashkukmo, the founder of the dynasty. Here he is on the so-called Motmot stone. This was dedicated in AD 435 on a sort of Maya millennium, the end of one of the great 400-year cycles of Maya history. And Yashkuk-Mo is sitting here and is named here, Yashkuk-Mo, and he is faced by his son and eventual successor, the second king of the dynasty. So here is the contemporary record of Yashkuk-Mo on the throne during his own lifetime. He dies in about AD 436, 437. So there is now no doubt whatever that the Maya kept detailed royal genealogies going back centuries in time and were able to produce them and reproduce the images of these kings on monuments several centuries later. Now, when Bob Scherer looked at the skeleton of Yashkuk-Mo, it was clear that he'd been in the wars, quite literally. He had healed battle scars. And also, the chemistry of his bones showed that he didn't come from Copan. He was a stranger king who had grown up in or near Tikal and had arrived in Copan in about AD 426 and taken over as king. The fact that he was a warrior king is something that proved extremely interesting because of the decipherment at the same time by the young British epigrapher Simon Martin and his colleague Nikolai Gruber of a series of events in Maya history that show that from the 6th through to the end of the 7th century, there were in fact massive wars going on in the Maya lowlands, particularly between the great city of Calakmul and the city of Tikal. And between AD 562, when Calakmul launched its first attack, and the end of the 7th century, Calakmul stitched together a series of alliances with other cities, such as Piedras Negras and Yaxchilan, Dos Pilas, Canquen, Naranjo, and Caracol, to try to squeeze Tikal into submission. It's rather like the US putting together NATO and CETO and CENSO in the Cold War to contain the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. Tikal got fairly beaten down, in fact. For quite a period, the kings of Tikal didn't erect any inscribed monuments. They seem to have been very much under the thumb of the people at Calakmul. But then a new king came to the throne, and this is Hassochan Kawil, the man who's buried under Temple 1. You can see that all of the relationships here between Calakmul and Tikal are in fact unfriendly. The unfriendly relationships are in red, the friendly ones are in black. And you can see Calakmul like a great spider here, reaching out to get all of these other cities involved to try to squeeze Tikal. And Tikal has very few allies, although one of them, right out here, is Palenque. Well, in the 680s, this new king, Hassochan Kawil, came to the throne in Tikal. And in AD 695, he finally scored a knockout blow against the rulers of Calakmul. And in one of the carved lintels, in that funerary temple on top of his pyramid, he spells out what happened. Here he is, you see, here's his face. He's sitting on a throne with a great jaguar protector rising up behind him. And right in front of the jaguar's face is a little block of hieroglyphs, and it says, Uhubui Utok Pakau. It was cast down, his flint spear and his shield, Yijak Kak, smoking jaguar paw, Chul Ahau Khan, the holy lord of Calakmul, of the Khan kingdom. So this is the moment at which Calakmul is humbled and retreats from being a hegemonic power to being just another major city-state. Tikal bounces back, and for the next 200 years is one of the major Maya cities. And here you see, here at Calakmul Tikal, the site we've been working at, which I'm not going to go into today, but La Milpa may have been on the side of Tikal and taken out by Calakmul for the best part of a century as part of its war on Tikal. That's another lecture entirely. Now, here is the funeral temple of Hasan Kawil, and that carved lintel I showed you is here, or was here, above the doorway. It's now in the Museum für Völkerkunde in Basel. It was taken out in the 1870s. But this is the Renaissance of Tikal, and subsequent to the burial of Hasan Kawil under Temple 1, we get a whole series of other temples erected. The Great Plaza of Tikal becomes one of the most impressive royal open spaces in the Maya world. We have other things happening as well. Tikal and Kalatmul had their subordinates. And one of our fellows, Francisco Stradavelli, recently excavated this wonderful stucco facade. This is the upper part of the roof of a building, so the doorway would be down here somewhere. And we see an enthroned figure here, flanked by figures of Maya gods. And the inscription, which is along the frieze here, you can't really see it, but it says that he is Kinech Tahal Jak. This is the local ruler of the site of Holmul, the vassal of Ai Wasaj. He is the king of Naranjo, who is in turn a vassal of Kalatmul. So here we've got archaeological proof of the way in which we've got big kings, slightly smaller kings, and then even smaller kings in a feudal hierarchy. But even these rather smaller kings have splendid art and architecture to their names. Some of that art is portable art. So we have here what we call cylinder vessels. These are circular pots, and the rolled out designs on them show scenes of Maya courtly life. The only unfortunate thing about these is they're almost all looted. Looting is a terrible problem in the Maya area. Many buildings have been entered to find tombs which have these painted pots in, and for any one tomb with one saleable pot, probably 100 Maya buildings have been destabilized or even destroyed, simply to fill the showcases of unprincipled museum directors, principally in the United States and Germany and Japan, and private collectors who want something pretty to put on their mantelpieces. The problem, of course, is that by looting these things, you wrench them out of archaeological context, and they lose 90% of their value as evidence for past life. But what we can see in the remaining 10% on these pots, here we've got a scene of a king on a jaguar throne, and he's being brought bundles of white woven robes, like the ones you saw being worn on the Bonampak Murals. These are white cotton robes, and they're being brought in as tribute from one of the kingdoms that he has conquered. So Maya warfare was about acquiring resources, human resources in the way of women who could weave and embroider, resources in the way of men who could fight and till the land, not so much conquering territory as conquering what territory can yield. But there were also peaceable interactions. So here at the bottom, we've got a looted pot in the Australian National Museum in Canberra. And here you see a remarkably plump and well-fed Maya ruler, Pakal, in his sarcophagus. Must have looked like this when he was alive. And he is greeting a delegation here of 3 individuals, and the leader is drinking a bowl of chicha, maize beer. They've made a dent in this pot, and there are 3 more pots to go, so they're clearly going to have a party. They're being serenaded with wooden trumpets from the next room, like the ones on the Bonampak Murals, and even by a conch shell being played like a French horn with one hand put inside the bell to vary the notes. So these are valued visitors being treated properly. We don't know exactly what's going on here, but this man is carrying a bundle of flowers, and the flowers have been identified as a species which today in the highlands of Guatemala are carried by matchmakers when they're going to solicit the hand of a young lady in marriage. So it may be that what we've got here is the commemoration of the proposal for a marriage alliance between this kingdom and the kingdom from where these are ambassadors. So the looted pots can give us a lot of valuable sidelights on Maya courtly life, Maya rulership, Maya alliance, but only 10% of what they would have given us if they'd been excavated and documented properly. Now, some of the art that was endorsed by Maya kings was not, in fact, of Maya kings. This is a recent discovery at Kalatmul, in an area which we'd always jokingly called the market, because it had a whole series of what appeared to be the foundations of market stalls laid out. Well, recently, Juan Carrasco has excavated in this area, and he's found that it was indeed a market, and the temple there is dedicated to commerce. So instead of Maya kings in battles or Maya kings in courtly rituals, what we have here are people who are selling salt, who are selling chicha, selling maize beer. Here's a lady in a very expensive see-through gown who is putting a very large pot of chicha on the head of this lady. Let's have a closer look, who is going absolutely red in the face, carrying it. But the glyphs here are telling us about the commodities that these people are selling. And this one is wearing, as you see, a plaid-like garment, showing us that the Maya weavers were engaged in all sorts of interesting and unusual designs. I don't think that this is in fact a far western tartan, however near Burnside it may be. But these Kalatmul market murals have shown a completely new light on the way in which the Maya mercantile middle classes both could be and were portrayed in public art. Now, one of the most exciting discoveries in recent years, and the one with which I'm going to finish, was by our recently elected fellow, William Saturno, at the site of San Bartolo, about a day's hike north of Tikal in the jungle of northern Guatemala. He found a pyramid which had had a looter's trench driven through it, and while he was recording the structures in the side wall of this looter's trench, he found a trace of murals on the inside wall of what is here reasonably called the mural room. And you'll see this is built onto the back of an earlier pyramid, which was inside a later one. And we know that the dating of the mural room is about 100, possibly as far back as 200 BC, but certainly 100 BC, from a whole series of radiocarbon dates. The mural on the north wall here shows us a ritual involving the maize god, who is this chap here, and there are a series of porters bringing offerings. There's a cave here in which a Maya goddess is sitting. There's a great long serpent here with its head up here and its tail disappearing into the distance. And then beyond the mountain there's a separate scene in which a gourd is cracking open and 4 babies have popped out and a 5th one is coming out. This is the birth of the maize god in 5 different avatars. This is a set of Maya beliefs and legends that we didn't have any idea existed, and we certainly didn't have any idea they existed this far back in time, nor that there was a coherent Maya art style as far back as the 2nd century BC. So San Bartolo has totally transformed our understanding of the evolution of Maya public art. And this is in what was not even a Maya city, it was a small town. Now, on the west wall of the chamber were a series of figures. Here you see a Maya prince wearing a very elaborate headdress, but not wearing very much else at all, just a very skimpy loincloth. And he is perforating his penis with a long, spiky stick, and you can see the blood spurting out and falling on the ground. He is doing this because he is making a blood offering to a bird deity of which you can only see just the wing here and the big hooked beak, and the hooked beak is trailing a snake. And what he's offering, apart from his own blood, is a turkey. And the turkey has been split open, its heart torn out, and there are 3 hot stones here piled into the chest cavity, and this is the sizzle going up. So he's offering the odour of the meat to the bird deity in the way that, if you remember, the Greeks offered the thighs of bulls to Zeus, and indeed in the way in which the priests of Baal were offering the flesh of animals to Baal when Elijah came along and said, no, you don't do it that way, you burn them like this and zap them with light. There are several scenes of this sacrifice. So here we've got, again, part of the bird deity. You can just see his rump and his claws here. This is another scene, and here is the snake hanging from his beak. He's sitting in a tree which sits on top of one of these great long serpents. And he's being approached by the Maya prince, who again is performing penis perforation. And what he's offering this time is a large fish. And the fish has had its heart torn out, and we have 5 hot stones, and here you've got the sizzle of frying fish going up to the bird deity. Further along the wall, we've got one of the most interesting parts of the mural. What we see here is a throne made up of wooden scaffolding, rather like that scaffold that you saw on the Piedras Negras monuments with the ladder going up to the figure in the niche. And on the throne is sitting a figure holding an early form of the Maya ceremonial bar or scepter. He's wearing elaborate jade jewellery, but he is about to get even more. Here is an elaborately robed figure, sex indeterminate, but probably male, who is offering him a crown with jade ear ornaments and this trefoil thing, which is the badge of royalty. And then between them is a row of hieroglyphs, and the bottom glyph here is an early form of the hieroglyph Ahau, which means lord or ruler or king. So here we've got a Maya king on his throne, being enthroned, being given the crown, and being named in 100 to 200 BC explicitly as a king. But things at San Bartolo go back slightly further than that. As Bill Saturno was following the looter's trench into the tunnel, here's the mural room, here's the earlier pyramid onto which it's abutted, here's an earlier one inside, it's again the Russian doll principle, an earlier one still, and an earlier one here which has been demolished, and from that demolished building we have a block with hieroglyphs on it which dates to somewhere in the period between 400 and 300 BC. And what we have on this hieroglyphic block is a short inscription, you can see it here, and this glyph is an even earlier form of the Ahau, Lord, Ruler, King glyph. So here in the 4th century BC, we have Maya kings explicitly identified. We also have Maya writing in the 4th century BC. And it's not like any other form of writing in Mesoamerica. It's actually earlier than any of the surviving forms of writing, except possibly some of the monuments in Oaxaca. But even there, the script is completely different. So what we've got here is evidence of Maya script going back in its origins to before 400 BC, and of it being an autochthonous development of a writing system, the most complex writing system that the New World ever developed. So the kings who put up the great temples here at Tikal in 740, or Chichen Itza in about 900, or dedicated the stele of places like Copan, the kings of these great cities of the Classic period in fact have a long and distinguished ancestry which we are only just beginning to completely understand. Thank you.